My name is Judith. I'm 66 years old, and I never thought the woman who married my son would one day humiliate me in front of everyone I knew. My name is Judith. I'm 66, a retired nurse who's lived in the same quiet town my whole life. After my husband Peter passed away 7 years ago, this old house became both my comfort and my companion. Every creak in the floor, every faded photograph on the wall tells a story of the life we built together. Peter and I didn't have much when we started out, but we made a good life, one full of laughter, respect, and love that only deepened with time. Our only son, Matthew, was the pride of our lives. He grew up kind, hard-working, the sort of boy who held doors open and said thank you without being told. Even as an adult, he never forgot me on birthdays or holidays. He'd call every Sunday just to ask, "You need anything, Mom?" And every time he said it, I'd smile because I knew Peter would have been proud of the man he became. 4 years ago, Matthew married a woman named Serena. She was 35 then, beautiful, poised, and confident. I still remember the day he brought her over for dinner, how her perfume lingered in the air long after she left, and how she spoke with that polished assurance of someone used to getting her way. When I first met her, I thought she was perfect for him. She carried herself like someone from a different world, stylish, eloquent, ambitious. I thought she would bring even more joy into Matthew's life. I was wrong. From the start, I tried my best to welcome her with open arms. I made her favorite dishes when she visited, offered to babysit the children, even gave her pieces of my jewelry that had belonged to Peter's mother. I wanted her to feel part of the family, to know she was loved and accepted. But behind her polite smile, there was always something distant, something calculated. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. But as the months passed, the cracks began to show. One evening, I brought over a pot of homemade soup, the kind I used to make for Matthew when he was a boy. Serena took one look at it and said, "Oh, that's sweet of you, Judith, but we don't really eat this kind of thing anymore. We're trying to stay healthy." Her voice was gentle, almost apologetic. But her eyes said something different, something cold and condescending. I laughed it off, but I felt the sting all the same. Matthew never seemed to notice the tension. Serena was clever about it. Around him, she was affectionate and kind. She'd pour me tea, compliment my outfit, even ask about my garden. But the moment he left the room, her warmth would vanish. "You really shouldn't spoil the kids so much," she told me once after I brought them little gifts. "It makes it harder for us to teach them about discipline." I remember standing there, clutching the small bag of toys in my hands, smiling weakly while she went back to scrolling on her phone. It wasn't what she said, it was the tone. That quiet authority. As if I were some outdated relic she had to tolerate. Peter used to say, "Kindness isn't weakness, Judith, it's quiet strength." Those words echoed in my mind every time I bit my tongue and chose silence over confrontation. But even strength has limits. Over time, I began noticing other things, little glances, small remarks, questions that seemed harmless but weren't. She once asked about my late husband's investments. Another time she asked if my house was paid off yet. She asked about my insurance, about who would take care of things if something happened to me. I brushed it off as curiosity, but deep down, I knew better. Serena wasn't just uninterested in me, she was interested in what I had. I could see how her eyes flickered when Matthew mentioned my 2 rental properties or my pension. I saw the way she looked around my house as if mentally appraising every object. I wanted to believe she loved my son for who he was, but part of me feared she saw him as a step toward something bigger: security, money, maybe even control. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself that love could change people, that if I kept showing her kindness, she'd soften toward me eventually. I thought of my son, of the peace in his voice when he said his wife made him happy. I didn't want to take that from him. Then came the day that changed everything, the day my patience finally ran out. It was a warm Sunday afternoon. Matthew and Serena had invited me over for a backyard barbecue. They'd also invited several of their friends and neighbors, people I barely knew. I decided to bring something special, Peter's favorite dessert, my apple pie with a cinnamon crust. I'd made it hundreds of times, but that day, I took extra care, wanting it to be perfect. When I arrived, Serena was in the middle of entertaining a small crowd. Her laugh rang through the yard, perfectly timed, perfectly pleasant. She greeted me with that polished smile of hers and accepted the pie I'd brought. She looked at it for a moment and then said loudly, "Oh, Judith, that's sweet. But we're all trying to cut back on sugar." Everyone laughed. Not cruelly, but enough. Enough to make my hands tremble and my chest tighten. I smiled, pretending not to care, pretending it didn't hurt. I placed the pie on the table and found a quiet spot near the corner. I stayed for an hour, making small talk, smiling through clenched teeth. Serena never once apologized. In fact, she made a point to show everyone how modern and health-conscious she was, taking pride in embarrassing me under the guise of humor. When I finally excused myself to leave, Matthew gave me a quick hug and said, "Thanks for coming, Mom." He didn't notice how red my eyes were. Walking home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not sadness, not anger, but humiliation. A sharp, burning humiliation that sat in my chest like a weight. I walked into my empty kitchen, placed the untouched pie on the counter, and stared at it. The smell of cinnamon and butter, once comforting, now felt bitter. For years, I'd believed silence was the high road. I'd believed keeping peace was worth swallowing pride. But that afternoon, I realized silence had cost me something precious: my dignity. I sat at the kitchen table until the sun went down, thinking about Peter, about how he would have never let anyone treat me that way. And then, for the first time since he died, I spoke out loud to the empty room. Never again. That night, I decided something important. I would no longer be the quiet old woman people thought they could dismiss. I had lived too long, worked too hard, and sacrificed too much to let anyone make me feel small. Serena thought she'd embarrassed me beyond recovery. What she didn't know was that her cruelty had awakened something in me, a strength I hadn't needed in years, but one I'd never lost. That day, Serena thought she'd silenced me with shame, but what she really did was wake up the part of me that never forgot how to fight back. It was supposed to be a warm, ordinary Sunday lunch, but Serena turned it into the day that shattered whatever peace was left between us. I remember that morning so clearly. The sun was bright, the sky a soft blue, and there was a crisp breeze that carried the scent of fresh-cut grass through my open window. I woke up early, determined to be my best self. To show Serena that no matter what had happened at that barbecue weeks before, I could still be gracious. I told myself that I would rise above it. I'd bring a smile, a kind word, and maybe that would be enough to smooth things over. Matthew had called me the night before, his voice cheerful. "Mom, Serena's inviting a few people over again tomorrow, just a small get-together. You'll come, right?" I hesitated for a second, remembering the sting of laughter from last time. But I could hear the hope in his tone, that childlike eagerness that still lived somewhere inside the man he'd become. I agreed. "Of course, sweetheart, I'll be there." I spent the morning preparing a dish my husband used to love, a roast chicken seasoned with rosemary and garlic, slow-cooked until the skin turned golden and crisp. It was simple, homely, the kind of meal that spoke of love more than style. I wrapped it carefully and drove over, reminding myself to stay calm, polite, and pleasant. When I arrived, their backyard looked like something out of a magazine string: lights, floral centerpieces, soft music playing in the background. Serena was in her element, floating from guest to guest, like a queen hosting her court. I smiled and approached her, holding out the dish. "I brought something for lunch. I thought everyone might enjoy it." She looked at the chicken, then at me, her lips curling into that polite, practiced smile. "Oh, Judith, you didn't have to. We already have a caterer." Her voice carried, just loud enough for people nearby to hear. A few of them chuckled politely, unsure of how to react. My heart sank, but I tried not to let it show. "Well," I said softly, "I thought homemade might be nice." She laughed lightly. "Oh, I'm sure it is. It's just, People aren't used to that anymore. You know how everyone's into modern food, low carb, gluten-free, that sort of thing. Her words felt like a slap, though her tone was sweet as honey. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the ground. I glanced at Matthew, hoping for some kind of reassurance. But he was busy talking to a coworker, unaware of what was happening. I placed the dish on a side table, forcing a smile. Maybe someone will want to taste later, I said quietly. Serena turned away before I'd even finished my sentence. For the next hour, I stood near the back of the yard, sipping water, watching as Serena basked in admiration. Every laugh seemed louder than it needed to be, every compliment directed at her appearance or hosting skills carefully absorbed like validation. I didn't want to be bitter, but something inside me began to crack. Then it happened so quickly, so unexpectedly, that it took me a moment to understand what was going on. One of the guests, a woman in her 30s, was carrying a glass of red wine. Someone brushed past her, and a few drops splashed onto Serena's pale dress. It wasn't much, barely visible really, but Serena's expression changed instantly. Her smile vanished, replaced by irritation. She turned sharply toward me. "Judith," she snapped, loud enough that every conversation around us stopped. "Please, can you be careful? You've already ruined one dress before." For a second, I couldn't move. I hadn't even been near her. The crowd went silent, all eyes on me. My hands trembled as I looked down at the glass of water I was holding. Half empty and perfectly clear. I didn't. I tried to speak, but she cut me off. "Honestly, it's fine," she said with a sigh that wasn't fine at all. "You probably didn't notice, but it's just... You need to pay attention. These things happen when people get older." Older? The word hit me like a blade. She didn't just insult me, she stripped me of dignity in front of everyone there. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was there. A soft, uncomfortable murmur of amusement from people who didn't know what else to do. Matthew rushed over, confusion on his face. "What's going on?" he asked. Serena smiled, as if nothing had happened. "Nothing, darling. Mom just had a little accident, that's all." Her words twisted the truth with such ease it made my stomach turn. I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to speak, to defend myself. But the words wouldn't come. Not because I was weak, but because I knew arguing with her would only make it worse. So, I did what I always did. I smiled faintly, nodded, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Serena patted my shoulder in mock sympathy. "It's okay, really. We all have off days." That was it. The crowd shifted awkwardly, conversations resumed, and I stood there, feeling small and foolish. My heart ached in a way I hadn't felt since losing Peter. For a moment, I imagined him there, standing beside me. He would have said something. He wouldn't have let this happen. But he wasn't there and I was alone. I waited for the right moment, then quietly excused myself. I told Matthew I wasn't feeling well. He gave me a distracted hug, not realizing the damage that had been done. When I reached my car, the tears came fast, hot, and uncontrollable. I gripped the steering wheel and cried until my body shook. Not because of the embarrassment, but because of the cruelty. Because my son, my own flesh and blood, had stood there while his wife reduced me to a punchline. When I finally arrived home, I walked straight to the kitchen and set the roast chicken on the counter. I looked at it for a long time, the steam still rising from the foil. I'd poured hours of care into that meal, and it hadn't even been tasted. I covered it again, placed it in the fridge, and sat down at the kitchen table. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual. The clock ticked softly, the refrigerator hummed, and my thoughts spiraled. Every moment of disrespect, every sharp word, every little insult I'd brushed off came flooding back all at once. I'd let it happen. I'd let her believe she could speak to me that way. And for what? To keep the peace? To protect Matthew from discomfort? No, not anymore. That night, I stood by my bedroom window and looked out at the dark street, the soft glow of the lamppost illuminating the quiet. I thought about Serena's voice, the laughter of strangers, the way my hands had shaken with humiliation. And then, slowly, that shaking turned to stillness. A strange calm settled over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I realized that Serena didn't just see me as an inconvenience. She saw me as powerless, disposable, someone whose time had already passed. But she was wrong. Because I still had something she didn't know about. Something powerful enough to change everything. If Serena wanted to shame me in public, then I would show her what real public humiliation looked like, and I'd do it with one single document. My name may not mean much to most people, but I've carried a secret for years, one that even my son doesn't fully understand. After that humiliating day at Serena's house, I spent the evening in silence. The roast chicken I'd made still sat untouched in the refrigerator. I couldn't bring myself to eat. My mind kept replaying every second of what had happened, her voice, the laughter, the look of pity on some of the guests' faces. By midnight, my anger had cooled into something sharper, something colder. I realized that I'd let Serena believe a story about me that wasn't true. She thought I was just an old woman living off a modest pension. Harmless and ordinary, without power or influence. That was her first mistake. When Peter and I were younger, we worked hard, harder than most people knew. I was a nurse for 40 years, and Peter managed a small construction business. We weren't rich, but we were smart. We saved, invested, and never spent more than we earned. Peter believed in long-term security, in preparing for the future. Money, he used to say, isn't about luxury, it's about choice, freedom. Before he passed, Peter made sure I was taken care of. He left me everything he'd built: our home, 3 rental properties, and a carefully managed investment portfolio. He'd also set up a trust fund for Matthew and the grandchildren. Altogether, it was worth far more than anyone in town would have guessed. But I never flaunted it. I didn't buy new cars or designer clothes. I shopped at the same grocery store, wore the same coats, and drove the same little blue sedan I'd had for a decade. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Especially not to someone like Serena. Still, her cruelty had stirred something deep in me, a need not for revenge, but for justice. She had made me small in front of others. She had turned my kindness into a joke, and I wanted her to see just how wrong she was about me. The next morning, I called Peter's old lawyer, Mr. Harris. He was in his 70s now, but sharp as ever, an old-fashioned gentleman with a soft voice and eyes that saw right through people. When I told him what had happened, he didn't interrupt, he just listened. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, he said, "Judith, do you remember what Peter always told you? Never let anyone write your story for you. Maybe it's time to remind them who you are." I smiled for the first time in days. That afternoon, I drove to his office. It was tucked between a bank and a bakery, just as it had been for decades. The smell of old paper and lemon polish filled the room as I sat across from him. We talked for nearly 2 hours. I explained that I wanted to make changes to my will, not just legally, but strategically. He raised an eyebrow. "Strategically?" "Yes," I said. "If my daughter-in-law wants to make a spectacle of me, then I'll give her one she'll never forget." Mr. Harris's mouth twitched into a knowing smile. "Publicly?" "Very," I replied. He nodded. "Then let's make it airtight." We spent the next few weeks going over every document. I wanted everything written clearly, no loopholes, no gray areas. I decided that most of my estate would go directly to my grandchildren. The properties would be held in a family trust they could access when they were adults. A portion would go to charity, in Peter's name, to fund scholarships for nursing students. Matthew would receive a fair share, but Serena? Not a cent. When I signed the papers, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about money. It was about principle. About dignity. About showing that even at 66 I was still in control of my own life. Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair. "Would you like to keep this private, or?" I looked him in the eye. "No. I want it public." He chuckled softly. "Ah, making a statement." "Exactly," I said. "If she wants to play with reputation, she'll learn how heavy it is to lose one. Over the following days, I began noticing little shifts in Serena's behavior. Maybe she'd sensed something. Maybe Matthew had mentioned I'd visited the lawyer. She started calling more often, using a syrupy tone that almost made me laugh. "How are you feeling, Judith? Need help with errands? We can come by this weekend." But her visits weren't out of kindness, they were reconnaissance. I'd catch her eyes darting around the living room, studying the furniture, the framed photos, even the old clock on the wall. She'd ask casual questions about my affairs, pretending to sound concerned. I played along. I offered her tea, smiled warmly, and let her think I was still the fragile woman she believed she'd broken. Inside, though, I was miles ahead. Every word, every look, every little condescending gesture, I memorized it. Because soon, I wouldn't need to defend myself with words. The truth would speak louder than anything I could say. At night, I'd sit at my desk and write in my journal. I wrote about Peter, about Matthew, about the years of love and sacrifice that built the foundation of everything I had. I wrote about Serena too, not with hatred, but with clarity. I wanted to understand why someone like her felt the need to tear others down to feel strong. And though I didn't forgive her, I pitied her. People like Serena build their worth on how others see them. Take that away, and they crumble. When I looked at the signed documents on my desk, embossed with the lawyer's seal, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't revenge anymore, it was restoration. I thought about the way Serena had shouted at me, the way she'd laughed, the way everyone else had watched and done nothing. I thought about how powerless I'd felt in that moment. And now, here I was, holding the power to shape the story myself. Peter would have been proud. He always said that dignity wasn't about silence, it was about strength wrapped in grace. I understood that now. The last thing I did that evening was write a small note on top of the folder that contained my will. It said simply, "For those who value money over manners, here's your lesson." I tucked the folder neatly into my desk drawer and smiled. The weight on my chest lifted. For the first time since Serena entered my life, I felt like myself again. Not the quiet widow everyone pitied, not the background character in my son's household. But Judith, the woman who had worked, loved, endured, and built something lasting. Serena thought she'd married into control, but she had no idea she'd married into consequence. And I was ready to show her exactly what that meant. In small towns, secrets have wings, soft and silent at first. But once they take flight, there's no stopping where they'll land. It didn't take long for people to start talking. I hadn't told a soul about changing my will, yet somehow whispers began drifting through our little town. Maybe it was because Mr. Harris's assistant had mentioned my visit at the bakery, or maybe someone spotted Serena's car parked outside his office and assumed something was amiss. Either way, within a week, the air around me had changed. Neighbors started greeting me differently. They'd linger a little longer during small talk, asking gently loaded questions. "Everything all right, Judith? Haven't seen Serena around lately." Or, "Heard you've been keeping Mr. Harris busy, good for you, getting your affairs in order early." Their voices carried curiosity wrapped in politeness, but their eyes were hungry for details. I didn't feed them any. I simply smiled and said, "Just organizing things, dear. Nothing exciting." And with that, I'd change the subject. Meanwhile, Serena must have sensed the change too. Maybe it was the looks she got at the grocery store, or the way people stopped complimenting her as quickly. Whatever it was, she noticed the shift. And she hated it. At first, she tried to control the narrative. She told her friends that I'd been acting confused lately, that I was obsessing over paperwork because I was getting older and lonely. She painted herself as the dutiful daughter-in-law who was worried about me. Of course, in a town like ours, that kind of talk only makes people more curious. And curiosity has a funny way of turning sympathy into suspicion. A few of my longtime friends, people I'd known since nursing school, began calling to check in. "Judy," one of them said, "people are saying Serena's been talking nonsense about you. Are you all right?" I assured them I was fine, that I wasn't losing my mind, and that some things were just better left unspoken. I wanted to laugh at the irony of it all, how the woman who'd mocked me for being old-fashioned now found herself trapped in the oldest game of all, gossip. I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to say a word. The more Serena talked, the more she revealed herself. Still, part of me couldn't shake the sadness of it. I had never wanted a war. I only wanted respect. I'd hoped that by showing restraint, she'd come to value peace. But people like Serena don't understand peace. They mistake kindness for surrender, silence for weakness. One afternoon, I decided to visit the park where I used to take Matthew as a boy. The air was crisp. The pond shimmered. And I sat on our favorite bench, letting the memories wash over me. A few people walked by and nodded politely. Some stopped to chat. A woman named Harriet, one of Serena's so-called friends, sat beside me and sighed. "I'll be honest, Judith," she said, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "Serena's been saying things that don't sit right. About you being unstable. That you're forgetting things, losing track of your money." I turned my head slowly, studying her face. "Is that so?" I asked calmly. She nodded. "She even mentioned you might not be fit to manage your own affairs anymore." I thought it sounded strange. "You've always been sharp as a tack." I smiled gently. "Thank you, Harriet. That's kind of you to say." Inside, though, my stomach twisted. Serena wasn't just talking, she was preparing something. Planting seeds. She wanted people to doubt me, to question my mind. Because if I were seen as unstable, then the will I'd written could be challenged. She was clever, I'll give her that. But I'd been dealing with clever my entire career. I'd handled manipulative patients, cunning administrators, and families who tried to twist stories to their favor. Serena was just another version of that, dangerous in her charm, predictable in her ambition. That evening, I took out a large binder from my desk and began documenting everything. Every insult, every manipulation, every incident of cruelty or deceit. I wrote down dates, names, details. I kept copies of messages she'd sent, little notes she'd left. Anything that showed who she really was. I titled the binder Legacy. It wasn't anger driving me, it was clarity. I needed proof, not for myself, but for the record. Because I knew this wasn't over. Serena would make a move soon, and when she did, I wanted to be ready. Over the next few weeks, I went about my days quietly. I tended to my garden, met friends for tea, and volunteered at the community center. But everywhere I went, I could feel the whispers trailing behind me like a faint echo. People were curious, yes, but they were also beginning to see the cracks in Serena's perfect image. At the grocery store, I overheard two women talking near the fruit aisle. "Did you hear what Serena said about Judith?" one whispered. "She claims Judith's losing her mind, but when I saw her last week, she was sharper than anyone there." The other woman replied, "Maybe Serena's the one losing it. She seems obsessed lately. Always complaining about her mother-in-law. Not a good look." I didn't say a word. I just picked up my apples and smiled quietly to myself. The truth, it seemed, was beginning to work on its own. Matthew, however, grew distant. I could tell Serena was feeding him stories, twisting small things into worries. He called less, and when he did, his tone felt strained. "Mom," he said one evening. "Serena's just concerned. She thinks maybe you've been stressed. You've been going to the lawyer a lot, right?" "Yes," I said evenly, "because I like to keep my affairs organized, that's all." He hesitated. "She just worries you might be overwhelmed. She says you've been forgetting things lately." I let out a soft laugh. "Well, I'm glad she's paying attention. Tell her not to worry, dear. My memory's just fine." He didn't press further, but his silence on the other end told me everything. Serena's lies were taking root in his mind. That night, as I sat in my study, I looked around at the life Peter and I had built, the shelves lined with books, the framed photos, the certificates, the records of everything we'd accomplished. I felt no fear. Only resolve. Serena could talk all she wanted. She could spin her web of gossip, whisper her poison into ears willing to listen. But, eventually, Words lose their power when the truth stands tall. And soon, I would make sure everyone saw that truth with their own eyes. As I closed the binder and placed it back on my desk, I caught my reflection in the window. For a moment, I didn't see an old woman. I saw the nurse who had stayed awake for 48-hour shifts, the wife who had built a home from nothing, the mother who had raised a good man. Serena thought she could define me with her words. She didn't realize I'd already defined myself with a lifetime of action. Serena wanted to play with reputation, but she was about to learn that reputations, once broken, don't rebuild easily. Most families only hear the contents of a will after someone dies, but I decided mine would be read while I was still very much alive. I planned it carefully, down to the smallest detail. It had been almost a month since Serena's rumors began to swirl, and I'd spent that time listening quietly, waiting for the right moment to act. Every whisper, every side glance, every strained conversation only confirmed what I already knew. She was trying to destroy my reputation before I could destroy her illusion of control. But if there's one thing I've learned in 66 years, it's that people who build their image on lies eventually collapse under their own weight. All you need to do is give them an audience. So, I decided to host a dinner. Not at Serena and Matthew's house, at mine. I wanted it to be intimate, deliberate, and unforgettable. I called Matthew first. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my tone light, "I was thinking we should have a small family dinner. Just us, the kids, and maybe a couple of friends. I'd like to talk about future plans." There was a pause on the other end. "Future plans?" he asked carefully. "Yes," I said. "It's time I start organizing things properly. You know, before they become complicated." He hesitated. "That sounds serious." "Not serious, darling. Sensible," I replied with a smile he couldn't see. "Bring Serena. I'd like her there too." He agreed, though his tone carried a hint of caution. I could almost hear him thinking about how Serena might react. Over the next few days, I invited two of my oldest friends, Clara and Ruth, and, of course, Mr. Harris, my lawyer. I introduced his presence as a favor to help explain legal details. In truth, I wanted a witness. The night of the dinner, my home felt alive again. The table was set with my best china. The candles flickered softly, and the smell of rosemary chicken and fresh bread filled the air. I wore a pale blue dress Peter had always loved. I felt calm in the way one feels just before a storm they know they'll survive. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and smiled. Serena entered first, wearing a white silk dress and her signature smugness. She looked around as though evaluating whether my home still met her standards. "This is lovely, Judith," she said, her voice dripping with politeness. "Thank you, dear," I replied. "I'm glad you could make it." Matthew followed, carrying a bottle of wine and looking slightly tense. The grandchildren ran in behind him, their laughter cutting through the stiffness in the air. For a moment, I felt warmth. They were my reason for everything. Once everyone was seated, dinner began smoothly. Small talk, laughter, polite compliments. Serena kept up her usual act, charming and perfectly poised. But I could see it, the small flicker of suspicion in her eyes. She knew something was coming, though she didn't yet know what. After dessert, I stood up slowly and tapped my glass with a spoon. The gentle chime silenced the room. "I appreciate everyone being here tonight," I began. "I wanted to have this dinner not just for the food or company, but to bring clarity. I've always believed in facing life head-on, and since I'm still of sound mind and body, I'd like to make sure there are no misunderstandings about my future plans." Serena's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She gave Matthew a quick glance, then smiled. "Oh, Judith, there's no need to talk about things like that now. We have plenty of time." "Oh, but I insist," I said warmly. "You see, Serena, I think it's better to speak while we're all here and can listen clearly before time or assumptions twist the truth." Mr. Harris cleared his throat, unfolding a stack of papers from his briefcase. "As Judith's attorney," he said, "I'm here at her request to ensure her wishes are documented and properly communicated." Serena straightened in her chair. "Her wishes?" she repeated. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "My will." A silence fell over the room so thick you could feel it pressing against your skin. Matthew looked stunned. Serena's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. I just think it's time, I continued gently. You never know what tomorrow holds, and I'd rather my family know everything now, no surprises later. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses and began reading. The words flowed like a calm river, steady and precise. I watched Serena's expression change with each line. To my son, Matthew, Mr. Harris read, I leave a share of my estate equal to one of my 3 properties, as well as joint authority over the family trust. To my grandchildren I leave my home, to be held in trust until they are of age. To the Street Agnes Nursing Scholarship Fund, I leave a contribution of $50,000 in honor of my late husband, Peter. Serena blinked rapidly. Her face grew pale. Wait, she said sharply, interrupting. I'm sorry, what about… She gestured vaguely toward herself. Serena, dear, my will includes my family and my causes. You are neither. Her jaw tightened. A faint gasp rippled through the table. Matthew's face flushed. Mom, he began, but I raised a hand gently. No, Matthew, let me finish. I turned to Serena, my tone still kind but firm. You've been in my family for a few years and I had hoped we'd grow closer. But lately, your behavior has made me realize that respect can't be bought or inherited, it has to be earned. She opened her mouth to speak, but I continued. You embarrassed me in front of my friends, questioned my sanity behind my back, and treated me like a burden instead of family. I've spent my whole life building what I have with hard work and decency. I won't allow it to fall into the hands of someone who doesn't value those things. Serena's voice shook. You can't do this. You can't just… Legally, Mr. Harris interjected. She can, and she has. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the grandfather clock. Serena's face turned red, then white. She pushed back her chair abruptly, the legs screeching against the floor. This is manipulation, she shouted. You're punishing me because I have standards. I looked at her calmly. No, dear. I'm protecting my legacy because I have standards. She stood there, trembling, her eyes darting between me, Matthew, and Mr. Harris. This isn't fair, she hissed. Fairness, I said gently, isn't about getting what you want. It's about giving what's deserved. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she turned sharply and stormed out of the dining room, slamming the front door behind her. The sound echoed through the house. No one spoke for several seconds. Matthew sat frozen, torn between loyalty and shock. Clara reached across the table and touched my hand. You did the right thing, she whispered. Mr. Harris began collecting the papers, tucking them neatly into his briefcase. Everything's official, he said. Witnessed and signed. I nodded, feeling a strange peace settle over me. I looked at Matthew, who finally raised his eyes to meet mine. I'm sorry, Mom, he said quietly. I smiled softly. I know, sweetheart, I know. As the evening drew to a close and everyone began to leave, I walked to the window and watched the taillights of Matthew's car fade into the darkness. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't schemed. I had simply spoken the truth, in front of everyone who needed to hear it. Her reaction was everything I'd expected and exactly what I needed to prove that I had made the right choice. The moment Serena realized she'd been written out of my will, something in her eyes changed from arrogance to pure, desperate fear. That dinner had stripped away the last of her pretense. She'd walked into my home expecting control, and left with her entire illusion shattered in front of everyone she'd tried to impress. I didn't gloat, not even a little. I didn't need to. The truth had done all the work for me. After the guests left, the silence in my house felt heavy but peaceful. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and let the events replay in my mind. I could still see Serena's face, the way her expression cracked the moment she realized I had not only outsmarted her but done so with grace. She wasn't used to losing, she wasn't used to consequences, And something told me she wouldn't take this defeat quietly. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:15 a.m. Too early for anything polite. When I answered, Matthew's voice came through, tired and strained. "Mom," he sighed. "Serena's upset. She says last night was humiliating." "I imagine it was," I replied evenly, stirring my tea. "She just feels blindsided. She thought you trusted her." I almost laughed. "Trust isn't something that comes with marriage papers, Matthew. It's earned." He hesitated. "She thinks maybe you should reconsider. You know, update the will again when things calm down." "Matthew," I said gently but firmly, "I love you, but this isn't open for discussion. Tell Serena I wish her peace, but the matter is closed." He didn't argue. I could tell part of him agreed, but he was caught in the tug-of-war between wife and mother. When we hung up, I stared out the window, knowing that conversation wasn't the end, it was the beginning. By noon, Serena called me directly. Her tone was falsely calm, that sugary sweetness she used when she was trying to manipulate. "Judith," she began, "I just want to clear the air. Last night was a lot. I didn't mean to overreact." "That's quite all right," I said softly. "It's behind us now." "Good," she replied quickly. "Because Matthew and I were thinking, maybe we could come by this weekend to go over some of your financial paperwork, just to make sure everything's in order. You know, to help." Her words were smooth, but her intent was sharp as glass. I smiled into the receiver. "That's thoughtful, dear. But everything is perfectly in order. My lawyer and I are handling it." There was a long pause before she spoke again. Her voice tighter this time. "You don't trust family?" "I do," I said. "That's why my affairs are set up for their protection." She hung up soon after, but the silence on the line before she did told me everything. I had cornered her in the one game she thought she could win. Over the next week, I started hearing things, subtle things. A neighbor mentioned that Serena had been venting at the salon. Another told me she'd been visiting the bank, asking vague questions about her mother-in-law's accounts. Even Matthew's tone in our calls began to change, more clipped, more cautious. Then, one evening, while I was tidying up the kitchen, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Serena stood there, wearing her most sympathetic expression and holding a small potted plant. "I brought this for you," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Peace lilies, they're supposed to bring calm energy." "How lovely," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." She walked into my living room, her eyes flicking to the framed documents on my wall, the nursing awards, the certificates, the family photos. She sat down and crossed her legs delicately. "I wanted to apologize again," she began. "I didn't handle things well at dinner. I guess I just felt excluded. You've built such a beautiful life, and I thought maybe I could help carry it forward someday." Her words might have sounded sincere to anyone else, but I could feel the tremor of calculation underneath. She was testing the waters, seeing if she could charm her way back in. "Serena," I said, "help is always appreciated. But legacy isn't about money. It's about what you stand for." She smiled thinly. "Of course. But money helps." I met her gaze evenly. "Only if you let it own you." Her jaw tightened for a split second before she regained her composure. "Well," she said, standing up, "I just wanted to say there's no bad blood." "I'm glad to hear that," I replied, walking her to the door. "But Serena, I hope you understand something. What happened that night wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. I'm not your enemy, but I will defend my dignity." Her eyes flashed with something dark, a flicker of rage she couldn't hide. Then she smiled sweetly and said, "Of course, Judith. Take care of yourself." When she left, I locked the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. I could almost feel the storm she was carrying with her. Serena wasn't finished. She'd lost her footing, and desperate people claw at whatever they can to stay upright. The following week confirmed my suspicions. I received a call from Mr. Harris's office. His assistant sounded uneasy. "Mrs. Evans, I thought you should know. Serena called asking for copies of your will. She claimed you'd authorized her access." I laughed softly. "Did you give her anything?" "Of course not," she said quickly. "But I wanted to make you aware." "Thank you, dear," I said. "You did the right thing." By the time I hung up, my calm had hardened into steel. Serena wasn't just angry, she was plotting. Days later, she began spreading new rumors. According to her, I was getting forgetful, acting paranoid, misplacing important things. She told people I was being manipulated by my lawyer, that I was rewriting my will under pressure. It would have been laughable if it weren't so venomous. People started calling again, checking in, pretending to care while fishing for gossip. I stayed polite, unfazed, because I knew that soon, very soon, Serena's desperation would consume her completely. Matthew, meanwhile, grew increasingly uneasy. He stopped by one evening, alone, carrying a bouquet of daisies. "Mom," he said, sitting down across from me, "Serena's worried about you." "I'm sure she is," I said dryly. He frowned. "She thinks you're being taken advantage of, by Mr. Harris." I set my cup down and looked at him squarely. "Matthew, I've known that man longer than you've been married. He's honest, kind, and loyal. What Serena is doing isn't concern, it's control." He rubbed his face, sighing. "You two are tearing me apart. Can't we just make peace?" I softened then. "Peace only works when both sides want it, son. I've already offered mine." He left soon after, his shoulders slumped, torn between love and loyalty. I watched him go, my heart heavy. I didn't want to hurt him, but I also couldn't let Serena's lies stand unchallenged. That night, I pulled out my legacy binder and added new notes. Every call, every rumor, every attempt she'd made to manipulate the truth, it was all documented. And as I wrote, a thought came to me, one that made me smile in spite of everything. People like Serena think power lies in wealth and influence. But real power, the kind that lasts, comes from patience, from knowing when to act, and when to let others destroy themselves. Serena's desperation was no longer a threat, it was evidence. Every move she made was another step toward her own undoing. She had started a war she couldn't win, and the first casualty would be her own pride. When people build their power on lies, they never imagine the day those lies start collapsing, and Serena's collapse began quietly, almost beautifully. It started with whispers again. The same way all things in small towns do, not with a bang, but with murmurs that drift from porch to porch, from one coffee shop table to another. Only this time, those whispers weren't about me. They were about her. At first, they came in little ripples. The woman who ran the flower shop mentioned that Serena had been in there, arguing on the phone loudly. Someone at the grocery store said she'd overheard Serena complaining that her ungrateful mother-in-law was ruining her life. I didn't ask questions, I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening. Her story was starting to turn on her. The thing about lies is that they need constant maintenance. You have to keep them alive. Feed them. Patch up their holes. But sooner or later, people notice the inconsistencies. And in a town like ours, people love noticing things. One afternoon, I was at the community center helping to sort donations when a neighbor named Lillian leaned over and said, "Judith, have you heard what Serena's been saying now?" I smiled politely. "I've stopped keeping track." Lillian lowered her voice. "She told people you've been seeing doctors for memory loss. But here's the thing, she can't remember which doctor it was." I almost laughed out loud. "Oh, bless her heart," I said softly, stacking a box of books. "Maybe she's the one forgetting things." The truth was, I wasn't even angry anymore. Watching Serena's lies start to unravel gave me a strange sense of satisfaction, not because I wanted to see her suffer, but because I wanted the world to see her as she truly was. She'd wrapped herself in a perfect little image, elegant wife, doting mother, charming hostess, but cracks were forming, and soon there'd be nowhere for her to hide. It began affecting her social life first. Her friends started pulling away one by one. People who used to crowd around her at events now avoided her calls. At the weekly charity meetings she loved attending, she arrived late, left early, and spent most of her time scrolling through her phone, pretending not to notice the awkward silence that followed her. One evening, Matthew came over again. He looked tired, worn out in a way that went beyond work or stress. He sat down heavily and rubbed the back of his neck. "Mom," he said, "I don't know what's happening anymore. Serena's different, angry all the time, paranoid." I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "She keeps saying people are turning against her because of you. She's convinced you're spreading rumors." I met his eyes calmly. "You know me better than that." He nodded slowly. "I do, but she's spiraling. Last night she threw her phone across the room because one of her friends didn't answer her text. She's saying everyone's betraying her." I placed my hand over his. "Matthew, some people destroy themselves trying to protect a lie. All you can do is step back before they drag you down with them." He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I just wish things could go back to how they were." "So do I whispered, though deep down I knew there was no going back. Serena's lies had a life of their own now, and the more she tried to control them, the more they turned against her. Not long after that conversation, the consequences of her own deceit began catching up with her. A woman named Diane, one of Serena's closest friends, came to see me one morning. She arrived unannounced, looking uncomfortable, clutching a handbag too tightly. I invited her in and poured tea. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said. "I just wanted to clear something up." "Of course," I said, smiling faintly. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated. "Serena's been saying things about you, terrible things. But last week she told me something that didn't make sense. She said she saw your lawyer going into a psychiatrist's office. I happen to know that office belongs to a family friend of mine. When I asked him about it, he said he'd never met your lawyer or you." I chuckled softly. "That sounds about right." "She's unraveling, Judith," Diane said. "Everyone's starting to see it. She's making things up as she goes along. I think she's scared." "I know she is," I said. "Desperation makes people dangerous, but it also makes them obvious." Diane nodded slowly. "I don't think she realizes how much she's exposing herself. You don't need to do anything. Just wait." That advice was easier to follow than she could have known. I had no desire to interfere anymore. Serena was digging her own grave, one rumor at a time. A week later, I went to the Sunday market. The air was crisp, the smell of baked bread and roasted coffee beans mixing in the wind. As I passed the fruit stand, I overheard two women talking. "Did you hear about Serena?" One whispered. The other gasped. "No." "What now?" "She's been going around accusing half the town of conspiring against her mother-in-law. She even called the mayor's wife a gossip." I pretended not to listen, but I couldn't help smiling behind my shopping bag. The irony was perfect. The woman who had once prided herself on social status now couldn't show her face without people exchanging glances. Her lies had finally turned on her, just as I knew they would. Still, I didn't celebrate. Not outwardly. Instead, I kept to my quiet routines, gardening, reading, volunteering. The calmer I remained, the more unhinged she looked by comparison. And slowly, even Matthew began to see what I'd seen all along. One evening he called me, his voice low. "Mom, I think you were right." "About what?" "Serena. She's been different lately, cold, defensive. Every time I try to talk about it, she twists it into something else. She even accused me of taking your side against her." I felt a pang of sadness for him. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know this isn't easy." "It's not," he admitted. "But it's getting clearer. I think she's been lying to me, to everyone. I just don't know how to fix it." "Some things can't be fixed," I said softly. "They just have to fall apart." There was silence on the line for a moment before he said quietly, "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, Matthew." When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the quiet shadows stretching across my living room. For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. My son was beginning to see the truth. Not because I forced it, but because Serena's own actions had made it impossible to ignore. And as the days passed, that truth spread further. People who once whispered about me now smiled when they saw me at the cafe. Some even apologized quietly, saying they'd misunderstood things. I didn't hold grudges. I never needed to. Serena had done all the work for me. By the end of the month, she was a shadow of her former self, snapping at cashiers, avoiding gatherings, barely speaking to anyone. The same woman who had once strutted through the town like she owned it, now walked with her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting nervously. The lies she'd spun so carefully had finally caught her in their web, and now, no amount of charm could untangle her. When the police knocked on my door that morning, I already knew whose shadow stood behind them, and it wasn't justice they brought with them, but desperation. It was a Wednesday, quiet and gray. I was in the kitchen making tea, the kind of slow morning I'd grown to love. My days had become peaceful again, or so I thought. Then came the knock, firm, repeated. I glanced at the clock. 8:42 a.m., too early for visitors. When I opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood there. The younger one shifted uncomfortably. The older one offered a polite but serious smile. "Mrs. Evans?" he asked. "Yes?" "I'm Sergeant Larkin. We've had a report concerning you. May we come in for a moment?" My stomach tightened, but I stepped aside. "Of course." They entered, their presence heavy in the stillness of my home. One of them glanced around, perhaps expecting to find chaos. Instead, there was order: neatly stacked books, framed photographs, fresh flowers on the table. My life, calm and unthreatening. "Is something wrong?" I asked. The older officer cleared his throat. "We received a call from a family member who expressed concern about your well-being. Specifically, that you may be struggling with memory issues or confusion." I stared at him for a moment, my mind steady but my pulse sharp. "And who," I said slowly, "made this report?" He hesitated, then replied, "Your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Serena Evans." I let out a quiet breath, half a laugh. "Of course." He looked mildly embarrassed. "We're required to follow up on such claims, ma'am. I hope you understand." "Oh, I understand," I said. "Would you like to see the proof that I'm still perfectly competent?" The younger officer looked startled. "Proof?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Follow me." I led them to my study, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick folder neatly labeled personal and legal documents. Inside were current medical records, psychiatric evaluations from my annual checkup, and signed statements from both my physician and my lawyer confirming my mental soundness. I handed the folder to the sergeant. "Everything's up to date," I said. "And I'm sure Mr. Harris, my attorney, will be happy to verify that." The officers exchanged a glance. The younger one nodded slightly, flipping through the papers. "These are recent," he said, impressed. "Yes," I replied. "I like to be prepared, especially when dealing with family misunderstandings." The older officer smiled faintly. "I see no cause for concern here, Mrs. Evans. I'm sorry to have disturbed you." "No disturbance at all," I said. "Would you like some tea before you go?" They declined politely, clearly relieved. As they left, I could hear the younger one mutter, "I can't believe someone wasted our time like this." When the door shut, I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where they'd been. My heart was calm. But beneath the calmness was something else: disbelief tinged with sorrow. Serena had tried to have me declared mentally unfit. That was her next move. Her final card. And it had failed. I sat down at my kitchen table and let the reality sink in. I'd known she was desperate, but this was cruel. It wasn't just an attack on my dignity anymore, it was an attempt to erase my autonomy. To make the world believe I was incapable of thinking for myself. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Harris. He answered on the second ring. "Judith," I heard, he said before I could speak. "The officers stopped by my office after leaving yours. They were as embarrassed as I've ever seen a pair of policemen." She's gone too far, Harris, I said quietly. I agree, but you handled it beautifully. There's nothing she can do. Now. Legally, you're untouchable. Good, I said. Because this isn't just about her lies anymore. This is about my name. Later that afternoon, I took a walk through town. The streets felt smaller than usual, almost fragile. I passed familiar faces, some smiling, some curious. People had clearly heard something. News travels faster than wind around here. At the bakery, the owner, Martha, waved me over. Judith, she said, lowering her voice. You all right? Heard something strange this morning. I smiled softly. I'm fine, dear. It seems my daughter-in-law has been overly imaginative again, Martha snorted. Imaginative? She's losing her mind, that one. You know, she called my sister last week, asking if she knew any trustworthy psychiatrists, said you were having delusions. I shook my head, half amused, half weary. She's not well, Martha. But thank you for asking. Word spread quickly after that. Not about my supposed condition, but about Serena's cruelty. People don't like seeing an old woman attacked without cause. The tide turned almost overnight. By the end of the week, Serena couldn't walk into the market without feeling eyes on her. The same people she once charmed now whispered when she passed. Matthew, poor man, was caught in the crossfire again. He came to visit me one evening, his expression heavy with guilt. Serena told me they had to check on you because your doctor was worried. I looked at him quietly. And you believed her? His eyes dropped. I didn't know what to believe. But then Sergeant Larkin called to say everything was fine, that you were sharp as ever. He even said you handled the situation better than half the people they visit. I gave a small smile. Then perhaps you have your answer. He rubbed his temples, exhausted. I can't keep living like this, Mom. She's obsessed with this will. She won't stop talking about, be kind. It won't stop accusing people. Last night, she said you've turned everyone against her. I sighed softly. She's done that all on her own, Matthew. All I've done is tell the truth. He looked up at me, eyes wet. I know, I see it now. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix someone who doesn't think they're broken, I said gently. He nodded slowly, understanding more than he wanted to. When he left that night, I watched his car disappear down the quiet road and prayed not for myself but for him, because soon, he'd have to choose between the life he built and the truth he could no longer deny. The next day, I met with Mr. Harris again. We sat in his office going over documentation, every paper, every medical record, every detail of the incident with the police. I wanted everything properly filed. If Serena ever tried again, I wanted her to hit a wall of evidence so solid it would crush her lies before they even reached daylight. Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair, a glint of admiration in his eyes. You've handled this with remarkable grace, Judith. Most people would be furious. Oh, I'm furious, I admitted. But anger doesn't win wars, evidence does. He chuckled. Then I'd say you've already won. Walking home that evening, I realized something had changed in me. The humiliation I once felt had transformed into a kind of quiet power. I'd spent months letting Serena define the story, twisting the truth to make me look weak. But now, her lies had exposed her instead. And as much as part of me wanted to confront her, to shout, to make her feel the pain she'd caused, I didn't need to. The damage she'd done to herself was far greater than anything I could ever say. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my legacy binder once again. I added the new incident, detailed and precise. The police visit. The false accusation. The aftermath. I placed a copy of my medical evaluation beside it. My story, written in truth, was becoming my armor. Then I closed the folder and whispered to the empty room, Peter, I think it's time. Time to end this quietly, decisively, and publicly. Not out of spite, but out of dignity. If Serena wanted to question my sanity, then I would show her and everyone else in this town exactly how clear my mind and my intentions truly were. Some people fight their battles in private. I chose to end mine in the open, with truth as my only weapon and dignity as my armor. I woke up that morning knowing exactly what I was going to do. After months of gossip, humiliation, and deceit, it was time to stop letting Serena twist the story. She had taken my silence for weakness, my patience for surrender. What she didn't understand was that I had been waiting, not hiding. Waiting for the perfect moment to reveal everything in a way she couldn't distort. Mr. Harris was the one who helped me plan it. When I visited his office the week before, he listened to my idea quietly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. When I finished explaining, he smiled for the first time in months. "You always did know how to make a statement, Judith," he said. "If you're sure about this, I'll make the arrangements." "I'm sure," I told him. Serena took my name and dragged it through whispers. "It's time the truth gets the same attention the lies did." He nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Then, let's make it official." We decided on the perfect occasion, a charity luncheon at the town community hall. It was an annual event that raised money for the local hospital, something I had supported for years. Dozens of familiar faces would be there: neighbors, friends, council members. Even the local paper always sent a reporter or two. It was the ideal stage. I called Matthew a few days beforehand. "Sweetheart," I said, "I'd like you and Serena to come to the luncheon with me this Saturday. It would mean a lot." He hesitated. "Serena's been keeping to herself lately. I think it's time she didn't," I said softly. "This event is important. I want the family there." After a long pause, he agreed. I could hear the strain in his voice. I knew things between them had worsened. Serena's unraveling had spread from public whispers into their home, infecting every conversation with bitterness. I didn't want to hurt Matthew, but this was something I needed to do. Saturday arrived, crisp and clear. The sky was bright, the air cool, and the sunlight poured through my kitchen window as if even nature had decided to bear witness. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit Peter had always loved, pinned his old watch to my wrist, and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't see an old woman. I saw a survivor, steady, calm, and ready. When I arrived at the hall, the buzz of conversation filled the air. The smell of coffee and pastries mingled with the faint echo of laughter. The event was already bustling. I greeted people warmly, my heart steady, my mind sharp. Then I saw her, Serena. She arrived 10 minutes late, of course, wearing a fitted red dress and a strained smile. Matthew followed behind her, his expression unreadable. Serena's eyes darted around the room, scanning the crowd. When they met mine, she froze. For a second, I saw something flicker there, fear, maybe, or realization. I walked over, my heels clicking softly against the floor. "I'm so glad you came," I said, my voice even. "Of course," she replied quickly. "Wouldn't miss it." Her tone was rehearsed, but her hands fidgeted. The luncheon began with speeches from community leaders, updates about the hospital's progress, and announcements of donations. When it was my turn to speak, the room fell into a polite hush. Mr. Harris stood near the back, hands clasped, watching. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and smiled at the crowd. "Everyone, many of you know me, but for those who don't, my name is Judith Evans. I've lived in this town all my life. I've seen generations grow, families change, and I've always believed that integrity, true integrity, is the legacy we leave behind." I could feel the weight of my words settling in the air. I glanced briefly at Serena. She sat stiffly, her smile frozen, eyes wide. "I've been blessed with a long and full life," I continued, "and I've made mistakes along the way. But I've also learned that silence can sometimes let injustice breathe. So today I want to speak clearly, not about gossip, not about anger, but about truth." A ripple went through the room. People leaned forward, sensing something important was coming. "As most of you know, I recently updated my will," I said. "It's not something people usually discuss publicly, but I've never been one to do things the usual way." A few soft chuckles broke the tension. I smiled faintly, then continued. "I've decided to make the contents of my will public, not for drama, but for transparency. Because when family, wealth, and pride intersect, secrecy only breeds misunderstanding. And I've had quite enough misunderstanding in my life lately. The audience grew silent. I unfolded a single sheet of paper from my handbag, my summarized statement, notarized and signed. I read every word slowly, clearly. I, Judith Evans, being of sound mind and judgment, hereby leave the bulk of my estate consisting of my home, my investments, and 3 rental properties to the Evans Family Trust, to be managed for the benefit of my grandchildren's education and future. I leave a charitable donation of $50,000 to the Street Agnes Nursing Scholarship Fund, in memory of my husband, Peter Evans. I leave my remaining assets, including personal savings and items of sentimental value, to my son, Matthew Evans. I paused, letting the words sink in. Then I finished, softly but firmly. I leave nothing to Serena Evans, my daughter-in-law, as I believe legacy should be earned through respect, not entitlement. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clinking of cutlery had stopped. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Serena's face went white. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. People began to shift in their seats, exchanging glances. Whispers started soft, cautious, like the wind rustling through dry leaves. I folded the paper neatly and placed it back into my bag. I make this announcement not to shame anyone, I said calmly, but to ensure that when I leave this world, there is no confusion about who I was or what I valued. My husband and I built everything we had with integrity. I intend to leave it with the same. Applause began hesitantly at first, then grew stronger. Dozens of faces smiled up at me, some nodding, some teary-eyed. Mr. Harris looked proud. But Serena, she sat completely still, her eyes locked on me like a predator caught in its own trap. When the applause died down, I stepped off the stage. A few people stopped me to shake my hand, to tell me how brave or noble it was to speak so openly. I smiled, thanked them, and kept walking. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Serena rise from her seat. She whispered something to Matthew and left the hall quickly, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Matthew stayed behind, his face pale with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. He knew, finally, that everything she'd said about me all her lies had crumbled in that single moment. After the luncheon ended, the reporter from the Oak Ridge Gazette approached me. "Mrs. Evans," she said, "would you mind if I included your speech in next week's issue? I think people could learn something from it." I smiled softly. "You can print whatever you like, dear. Just make sure it's the truth." When I finally returned home, I made myself another cup of tea. The house was quiet again, but not lonely. The light from the late afternoon sun bathed the kitchen in gold. I sat there for a long time, thinking about everything that had led me to this day, the humiliation, the rumors, the false accusations, and how all of it had led to this single, perfect moment of clarity. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't fought with rage. I'd simply spoken the truth, out loud, where everyone could hear it. That day, I didn't just reclaim my reputation, I reclaimed myself. And as Serena walked out of that hall, she carried her own downfall with her. When Matthew showed up at my door that night, his eyes told me the truth before his mouth ever could. Something inside him had finally broken. The town was still buzzing about the luncheon. My phone hadn't stopped ringing since that afternoon, friends calling to congratulate me, neighbors dropping off baked goods, even strangers stopping me on the street to say how brave I'd been. It was all kind, but I didn't crave their approval. I hadn't spoken that day for applause. I'd spoken to be free. By evening, the house was quiet again. The sun dipped low, painting the walls in shades of gold and shadow. I was washing the teacup I'd used earlier when I heard the knock. It wasn't polite or hesitant, it was quick, urgent, the kind that carries emotion behind it. I dried my hands, walked to the door, and opened it. Matthew stood there. His shoulders sagged, his tie loose, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept or eaten properly in days. "Mom," he said, voice cracking. "Can I come in?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. He walked in, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. I could see the turmoil in every movement, his posture, his silence, the way he avoided my gaze. I poured him some tea without asking. When I set the cup in front of him, he didn't touch it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The ticking clock filled the room. Finally, he whispered, "She's gone." I tilted my head. "Gone where?" He swallowed hard. "She left. Packed her things, took the kids to her mother's for now. Said she couldn't stay married to someone who betrayed her." I didn't say anything. I just waited. "She said I humiliated her," he continued. "That I should have defended her when you made the will public. She called me spineless. Said I let you destroy her reputation." His voice broke on that last word. "But Mom, I didn't destroy anything. She did." I nodded quietly, letting him speak. "She's been lying to me for months," he said, the words tumbling out now. "About money, about what she told people, even about you. When the police came to check on you, she swore it was because she cared. But last week, I found the emails. She'd been contacting lawyers behind my back trying to find a way to challenge your will." My heart tightened, not out of surprise, but out of pity for him, for the marriage that was falling apart in front of him. "What did you do?" I asked softly. "I confronted her," he said, rubbing his eyes. "She didn't even deny it. She said she was just protecting our future. But all I saw was greed. It was never about family, Mom. It was about control." I reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "You see it now," I whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you, Matthew. I just needed you to see what she was capable of." He nodded, his face contorted with pain. "I know. And I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner. I should have seen it. All the little things you tried to tell me, I brushed them off because I wanted to keep the peace. I thought if I ignored it, she'd change. People like Serena don't change," I said quietly. "Not until they have no choice." He leaned back, exhaling shakily. "She said she's going to tell everyone you manipulated me, that you're trying to turn me against her." "Let her," I said simply. "The truth has a way of taking care of itself." He gave a weak laugh, shaking his head. "You sound just like Dad." At that, my chest ached in a different way. I smiled faintly. "Your father believed in truth more than anything, even when it hurt." For a moment, the room felt lighter, filled with memory. Peter's laughter, his quiet strength, the sound of him humming while fixing the fence. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. Matthew's eyes softened. "He would have been proud of you, Mom. Of how you handled everything." "I hope so," I said, blinking back, the emotion rising in my throat. "Because I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for peace." He looked up at me then. Really looked like he was seeing me for the first time in months. Not as the fragile woman Serena had painted, but as the mother who had raised him with values that money could never buy. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted. "Serena took the kids. She says she needs time to think. I don't want them growing up in the middle of this." "You won't let that happen," I said gently. "You're a good father. They'll see the truth in time." He nodded, though his shoulders still sagged under the weight of guilt. I just keep thinking maybe if I'd stood up to her sooner, things would have been different. I reached over, brushing his hand again. "Maybe," I said. "But guilt won't change the past. What matters is what you do now." He sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "What do I do, Mom?" "Start with honesty," I said. "With yourself. With the kids. They need stability more than explanations. And as for Serena, let her fight her battles alone. The truth doesn't need defending, Matthew. It just needs time." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening as resolve began to replace despair. We sat there in silence for a while, sipping our tea as the house settled into its evening rhythm. The wind rustled outside, soft against the window panes. For the first time in a long time, the quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was healing. Before he left, he stood at the doorway and turned back to me. "Mom," he said softly, "I want you to know something. You didn't just protect your legacy, you protected me. I might not have realized it before, but you saved me from a woman who would have ruined everything Dad built. Tears welled in my eyes. I didn't try to stop them. You saved yourself, Matthew, I said. I just made sure you could see clearly. He hugged me, then tight, genuine, the way he used to when he was a boy coming home from school after a bad day. I felt his shoulders shake slightly, the exhaustion and grief spilling out in silence. I held him, the way I always had, with unconditional love. When he finally stepped back, his eyes were brighter, calmer. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. I'll be here, I replied. After he left, I stood by the window watching his car disappear down the dark road, just as I had so many nights before. But this time, the feeling in my chest wasn't fear, it was release. I had spent so long trying to protect him quietly, hoping he'd see the truth on his own. And now he had. I turned off the lights, leaving only the warm glow of the lamp by Peter's old armchair. Sitting there, I whispered to the empty room. It's over now, love. The storm's passed. For the first time in months, I went to bed without replaying Serena's words in my head. I didn't dream of confrontation or revenge. I dreamed of peace, of laughter echoing in my home again. Of the grandchildren's small hands holding mine. Of Matthew smiling without that heaviness behind his eyes. That night, I realized revenge had given me justice, but truth had given me back my family. When I saw her handwriting on the envelope, I almost didn't open it because a part of me feared that even her apology might come laced with poison. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the letter arrived. The postman handed me the usual stack of mail bills, flyers, a magazine I didn't remember subscribing to, and one cream-colored envelope with my name written across it in looping cursive. I knew that handwriting immediately. Even before I saw the return address, my heart sank a little. It had been 3 weeks since the luncheon, 2 since Matthew came to me broken-hearted, and just over 1 week since I'd last heard anything about Serena. She'd left town for a while, staying with her mother in the next county. The gossip had died down, replaced by a different kind of silence, the kind that follows when people finally realize the truth. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table and set it down beside my teacup. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Part of me wanted to tear it open, to finally see what she had to say. The other part, the older, wiser part, wanted to throw it straight into the fireplace. But curiosity, or maybe closure, won out. I took a knife from the drawer, slit the envelope neatly, and pulled out the folded pages inside. The first thing I noticed was that the writing was shaky, uneven. Not the steady, perfect script she used on thank you cards and party invitations. This was the handwriting of someone trying not to cry. I began to read. Judith, I don't expect forgiveness. I know I've done things that can't be taken back. But I can't live with the weight of what I did without at least trying to tell you the truth, not the version I told myself to feel better, but the real one. I was angry. I was jealous. Not of your money, though I know it looks that way, but of your power. You had something I didn't respect. People listened when you spoke. They admired you. I wanted that, and I thought I could take it by tearing you down. But all I did was reveal the worst in myself. I told myself you looked down on me. That you didn't think I was good enough for Matthew. It was easier to believe that than to admit the truth. I was the one who felt small. Every time you smiled with kindness instead of fighting back, it made me feel weaker. And instead of learning from you, I lashed out. I see now what I became. A cruel, insecure woman who mistook your silence for condescension. I can't undo what I said, or how I hurt you in public, or how I tried to destroy your reputation when all you did was try to keep the peace. I'm sorry, Judith. Not the kind of sorry people say to fix things, but the kind that comes from realizing you've broken something in yourself. Please believe me when I say I never wanted to hurt Matthew. I loved him, but my pride poisoned everything good in our marriage. He deserves better. You both do. If nothing else, I want to thank you for what you did at that luncheon. It forced me to see myself clearly for the first time. You didn't humiliate me, you revealed me. And maybe that's what I needed all along. I don't expect a reply. But I hope, someday, you'll remember me not as the woman who shouted at you, but as the woman who finally learned what integrity looks like because of you. Serena. When I finished reading, I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. I didn't cry right away. I just felt still. Like every emotion, anger, hurt, pity, had settled quietly inside me, unsure which one to rise first. I read it again, slower this time, taking in every word. Her handwriting grew more uneven toward the end, the ink smudged in a few places. She'd cried while writing it. That much was clear. For months, I'd imagined what an apology from Serena might look like. I pictured her arrogant, defensive, making excuses. I never expected this, a confession so honest it almost broke my heart. Almost. Because though I believed the sincerity in her words, I also knew the damage she'd done couldn't be erased with ink and paper. Apologies don't rewind time, they don't unmake humiliation or undo betrayal. But sometimes, they open a door that's been locked too long. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, yet keep it, burn it, or send a reply. For now, I just needed to let the words breathe in the quiet. That evening, I walked out to the garden. The sky was soft pink, fading into lavender. The roses were in bloom again, their scent sweet and familiar. Peter's old bench sat beneath the oak tree, the one he built years ago when we first moved into this house. I sat there and watched the light fade, the world slipping gently into dusk. I thought about everything that had happened, the shouting, the humiliation, the lies, the police visit, the public reading of the will. Every act of cruelty, every act of courage, all leading to this moment of stillness. It was strange how things had come full circle. Serena had tried to destroy me in public, and now, in private, she was begging for understanding. Part of me wanted to be angry. Part of me wanted to hold on to that anger to keep it as proof that what she did mattered. But another part, the part that had always guided me, whispered that forgiveness wasn't weakness. Forgiveness was freedom. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her yet. But for the first time, I wanted to try. As I sat there, a light breeze rustled through the garden, scattering a few petals at my feet. I imagined Peter beside me, that gentle smile of his. He'd always believed in second chances, even when I didn't. People can surprise you, Judy, he used to say. Sometimes they just need someone to believe they can be better. I closed my eyes and smiled faintly. You'd tell me to forgive her, wouldn't you? I whispered to the air. The wind stirred again, almost like an answer. That night, I placed Serena's letter in my legacy binder, between the sections labeled resolution and reflection. I wanted it to be part of the story, not erased, not forgotten, but recorded honestly, just like everything else. I didn't write back right away. I wasn't ready. But I did take out a blank piece of stationery and place it beside the binder. A promise to myself that one day, when my heart was lighter, I might find the right words. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something you gave all at once. It was something you built slowly, like trust, like peace. And maybe, just maybe, Serena's letter was the first brick in that foundation. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel anger when I thought of her. I felt understanding. And that, I think, was the beginning of something new. When I invited Serena over for tea, I didn't do it out of pity or guilt. I did it because the woman who had once been my enemy finally sounded human in her apology. It took me a week after receiving her letter to make the decision. Every morning, I'd pass by my kitchen table and see the cream-colored envelope sitting there. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I wasn't ready to respond either. Forgiveness is a delicate thing. It doesn't bloom out of sympathy, but out of understanding. Then, one Thursday afternoon, while pruning the rose bushes, I realized I was tired of holding on to the past. Not because I wanted to forget what Serena had done, but because I wanted to stop carrying it. The weight of anger had served its purpose. It had protected me when I needed strength. But now, it only kept me tied to her in bitterness. So, I wiped my hands, went inside, and wrote her a short note. Serena, if you're sincere about what you wrote, then perhaps it's time we talk. Come by on Saturday at 3 p.m. I'll make tea. Judith, no promises, no false warmth, just an invitation. Saturday came sooner than I expected. I woke up that morning with a strange nervousness, the kind I hadn't felt in years. My hands shook slightly as I set the table: white lace cloth, porcelain teapot, lemon biscuits, and the floral china Peter had given me on our 20th anniversary. The house was spotless, the garden blooming just beyond the windows. Everything was ready, except perhaps my heart. At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Serena stood there holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, nothing extravagant, just daisies and lavender. She looked different. Not the polished, confident woman who once commanded every room, but softer. Her eyes were red, her posture humble. "Hello, Judith," she said quietly. "Hello, Serena, come in." She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The air between us was heavy, but not hostile, just uncertain, like the silence before the first step of a fragile truce. We sat at the table, the clinking of teacups filling the space between words that neither of us could yet find. "You have a lovely home," she said after a moment, her voice small. "I've always thought so," I replied, pouring tea into her cup. "Milk or lemon?" "Lemon, please." I added the slice carefully and pushed the cup toward her. She held it with both hands, as though afraid to break it. For a long time, we both sipped quietly, letting the tea fill the silence. Finally, Serena spoke. "I didn't think you'd want to see me." "I didn't," I admitted. "Not at first. But your letter, it made me think." She nodded slowly, staring down at her cup. "I meant every word. I was awful to you, Judith. Truly awful. I don't even recognize the person I was back then." I studied her face. The arrogance that once defined her was gone. What I saw instead was shame and something that looked a lot like regret. "I believe you," I said softly. "But believing doesn't erase what happened." "I know." Her voice trembled. "I don't expect forgiveness, I just wanted you to know that I finally see what I did. I ruined something beautiful. I took your kindness and turned it into ammunition because it made me feel small. You didn't deserve any of it." For a long moment, I said nothing. The sound of the ticking clock filled the silence. I thought about the first time she'd shouted at me in public. The humiliation, the gossip, the tears I'd hidden from everyone. Those memories still hurt, but they didn't have the same power anymore. "Serena," I said finally, "do you know what hurt me the most?" She looked up, her eyes wide. "What?" "It wasn't the shouting. It wasn't the lies or the police or even the gossip. It was the silence that followed. The way you let people think I'd lost my mind. The way Matthew suffered because he didn't know who to believe. You didn't just wound me, you wounded the family." Her face crumpled. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll never forgive myself for it." "Then learn from it," I said, "because guilt only matters if it leads to change." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm trying. I've been seeing a counselor since I left. I'm learning that control isn't love, and that pride isn't strength. I've lost everything. But maybe that's what I needed to start over." I felt something loosen in my chest. A small, unexpected compassion. "Losing everything has a way of teaching us who we are," I said. "I learned that after Peter died. You can let loss make you bitter, or you can let it make you wiser." Serena wiped her eyes, trying to smile. "I'd like to be wiser." I nodded. "Then start there." We sat quietly again for a while. The tension had softened into something gentler, something almost peaceful. The tea had gone lukewarm, but neither of us seemed to mind. After a few moments, Serena reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "I brought something for you," she said. Inside was a check. I frowned. "What is this?" "It's a donation," she said quickly. "For the nursing scholarship fund you set up in Peter's name. I know it's not much, but I wanted to contribute. To honor him. And you." I looked down at the check, then back at her. "That's thoughtful," I said quietly. Thank you. She shook her head. No. Thank you. For not slamming the door in my face. For giving me this chance. You're welcome, I said simply. But don't thank me yet. This doesn't erase the past, Serena. It just gives us a new beginning, and that's something fragile. It'll take time to rebuild trust. I understand, she said. And I'm willing to earn it. We both smiled faintly then. It wasn't the kind of smile that came easily. It was the kind that carried history, the kind that said, "We've survived something ugly and we're still here." As the afternoon light faded, we moved from the table to the garden. The air smelled of lilacs and fresh earth. Serena walked slowly among the flowers, touching the petals lightly with her fingers. "They're beautiful," she murmured. "Peter planted those," I said. "He used to say that even things buried deep in the ground eventually find their way to the light." Serena looked at me, her eyes soft. "That's exactly what you've done, Judith. You've found your way back to the light." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled. When it was time for her to leave, she hugged me, hesitant at first, but real. I stiffened instinctively, then slowly let myself return the gesture. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close. "Goodbye, Serena," I said as she stepped onto the porch. "Goodbye, Judith," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. "And thank you for the tea." After she left, I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her walk down the path. For the first time, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a woman who had been lost and was trying, however clumsily, to find her way home. When I went back inside, the empty teacups still sat on the table, the sun slanting across them like a quiet benediction. I thought of Peter again, of how he always believed in grace even when it wasn't deserved. Forgiveness didn't erase the scars, but it softened the edges, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like peace wasn't just possible, it was already beginning to take root. Forgiveness may begin with two people, but rebuilding a family, it takes everyone. And it takes time. The weeks after Serena's visit passed quietly. Like a slow sunrise after a long storm. Something inside the air around me felt lighter. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. The bitterness that used to follow me like a shadow had softened into something gentler: acceptance. Serena hadn't called after our tea, she hadn't needed to. That afternoon had said everything that words couldn't. For the first time in years, our silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. She was trying, and I could feel that. Sometimes, peace doesn't come through reconciliation, it comes through understanding. Matthew, however, was still navigating the wreckage of what Serena had left behind. When he came over the following Sunday, he looked tired but less haunted. He carried a pie, the kind he used to bake with Peter when he was a boy, and set it on the counter. "I made it with the kids," he said, smiling faintly. "They wanted to see you soon." My heart warmed. "I'd love that," I said. He nodded, his expression softening. "They miss you. Serena said she'd bring them next week if you're okay with that." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I'd like that, it's time." He seemed relieved, almost emotional. "Thank you, Mom. She's different now. I don't know if we'll ever be the same again, but she's trying to be better for them. That's all anyone can do," I said, gently. Trying is how healing starts. We spent the rest of that afternoon in the garden, sipping tea and talking about the grandchildren, about how Emily was learning to paint and Jacob was obsessed with dinosaurs. Hearing him laugh again, really laugh, felt like a kind of victory I hadn't expected. It wasn't the loud laughter of denial or distraction, it was the kind that comes when a heart starts mending. The following weekend, when Serena pulled up in the driveway with the children, I stood on the porch, unsure what to expect. My heart thudded softly as I saw the two small faces press against the car window, waving excitedly. "Grandma!" Emily shouted before the car had even stopped moving. I laughed, my nerves melting away. "Well, look who's grown a foot taller." Serena stepped out of the driver's seat, smiling shyly. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I saw something there I hadn't before: humility. perhaps even gratitude. "Hi, Judith," she said softly. "Hello, Serena," I replied. "You're right on time. The kids must be starving." Jacob barreled toward me, clutching a toy dinosaur. "Grandma, look, it's a T-Rex." I knelt down, my laughter spilling out. "He's fierce, just like you." Emily hugged me tightly around the waist, her small hands warm against my apron. For that moment, everything else fell away. No grudges, no anger. Just love, the kind that survives even the harshest winters. We spent the afternoon together in the garden. The children played while Serena helped me in the kitchen. We moved carefully around each other, our words polite but warm, like two people rebuilding a bridge plank by plank. At one point, while the pie baked, Serena glanced at the framed photo of Peter on the counter. "He looks kind," she said softly. "He was," I replied. "He had a way of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." She nodded, her eyes misting slightly. "I think I understand that now." I looked at her for a long moment before saying quietly, "I think he'd be glad you do." When the pie came out of the oven, the smell of cinnamon and apples filled the kitchen. The kids ran in, giggling, demanding the first slice. I laughed and cut pieces for everyone. We ate together at the same old wooden table that had once been filled with silence and resentment. Now, it was filled with chatter and laughter again. For the first time in years, my home felt alive. Later that evening, after Serena and the children had gone, Matthew stayed behind. He stood by the window, watching them drive away. "That went better than I expected," he said. "It did," I agreed. "Sometimes healing sneaks up on you quietly." He turned toward me. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her completely?" I smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't a finish line, Matthew. It's a path." And today, we took a few more steps forward. He nodded slowly, as though the weight on his chest had finally eased. "I don't know what happens from here, but I'm grateful, Mom. You've given us another chance." I reached up and cupped his cheek gently, the way I used to when he was a boy. "No, sweetheart. You gave it to yourself." That night, after he left, I sat out on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The sky was clear, the stars scattered like diamonds. I thought about everything that had happened, the pain, the pride, the unraveling, the rebuilding. Life has a way of breaking us down just to see if we can rise again. And somehow, we had. Over the next few weeks, Serena and I continued our delicate peace. She'd stop by occasionally, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone. We'd share tea, talk about their school projects, and occasionally laugh about the simplest things, how Jacob had broken another lamp, or how Emily had painted the cat blue. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't meant to be. But it was real. One afternoon, while we sat in the garden, Serena turned to me and said, "I don't know if I'll ever make up for everything, Judith. But I promise, I'll never stop trying." I smiled, looking out at the flowers swaying in the breeze. "Trying is enough, Serena. That's how families are built, not by being perfect, but by showing up, even after we've fallen apart." She nodded, her expression soft. "Thank you for letting me show up." The children's laughter echoed across the yard, bright and innocent. And in that moment, I felt Peter's presence again. Like a whisper carried by the wind. I imagined him watching us from wherever he was, smiling that patient, knowing smile of his. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in years, my heart felt steady. Family wasn't about blood or inheritance or even forgiveness, it was about choice. The choice to keep loving, to keep showing up, to keep believing in the possibility of better days. Serena had taken everything from me once, my pride, my peace, my dignity. But in the strange, unexpected rhythm of life, she had also given something back. Closure, and maybe even a reminder that people are capable of change. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the garden glowed with its last golden light, I whispered quietly to myself, "This is what peace looks like." Because in the end, revenge gave me justice, truth gave me strength, but forgiveness gave me back my family. We spend our whole lives trying to build something that will outlast us, but I've learned that the greatest legacy isn't written in wealth or property. It's written in the hearts we help heal. It had been a year since that afternoon when Serena and I shared tea in my kitchen, and peace had finally settled into our lives like a long-awaited spring. My home was once again a place of laughter, of little footsteps, of Sunday dinners that filled the air with warmth. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. The anger that had once consumed me was now nothing more than a faint shadow, a distant echo of who we used to be. Serena and I weren't best friends, not in the way people might imagine, but we'd found a rhythm that worked. Mutual respect, quiet understanding, and a shared love for the same family. I never thought I'd see the day when she'd walk into my kitchen carrying a tray of cupcakes she'd baked herself, or when she'd laugh as Emily and Jacob ran circles around us. Yet here we were. Every visit felt like a small miracle. Proof that even broken bonds could be mended with enough patience and humility. Matthew was happier too. He smiled more now, spoke with a peace I hadn't seen in years. The heaviness that once lived behind his eyes had lifted. Watching him with his children, hearing him call me every evening just to check in, it reminded me why I had fought so hard to stand my ground. Not for revenge, not for pride, but for him, for them all. That's when I began to think about what would come after me. I wasn't ill, but at 67, I knew time was precious. The events of the past few years had taught me that life could shift in an instant. And though my will had already been settled legally, I realized there was still something left to give, something more meaningful than any property or bank account. A different kind of inheritance. So one quiet morning, I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee and began to write. Not another legal document this time, a letter. A letter meant for Matthew, Serena, and the grandchildren. It wasn't easy. Every sentence carried the weight of years lived and lessons learned. I wrote and rewrote paragraphs, stopping often to think about what truly mattered. Money fades, possessions scatter, but wisdom can echo long after we're gone. When I finally finished, it filled several pages. I folded the letter carefully, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote on the front, "To be read when the time is right." But I didn't hide it away. I placed it in my legacy binder, the one that had carried every chapter of this journey. The humiliation, the revenge, the redemption. This would be its closing chapter. A few weeks later, on a bright Sunday afternoon, I gathered the family at the house for lunch. The table was full again, Serena setting out plates, Matthew carving roast chicken, the children laughing as they chased each other around the living room. When everyone finally sat down, I cleared my throat softly. "I have something to share with you all," I said, smiling. "No, don't look nervous, it's not another will reading." Laughter rippled around the table, easing the tension. Serena smiled nervously, but warmly this time. "I've written something," I continued, placing the envelope on the table. "A letter. Not because I'm planning to go anywhere anytime soon, but because I want you all to know exactly what I've learned, while I still have time to tell you myself." Matthew frowned slightly. "Mom, what is it?" I smiled. "Just a few words from an old woman who's lived long enough to make her share of mistakes, and a few right choices too." He nodded, curious. "Do you want to read it now?" "Yes," I said, unfolding the pages. My voice trembled slightly at first, but grew stronger as I went on. "My dear family, if you're reading this, it means I've lived long enough to see us whole again, and for that, I'm grateful. I want you to remember something. Life will never go the way you plan. People will hurt you, sometimes out of malice, sometimes out of their own pain, but never let that turn your heart hard. Strength isn't in vengeance, it's in choosing peace when you could choose pride. To Matthew, my son, you have always been my greatest joy. You carry your father's heart in your chest and my stubbornness in your soul. Use both wisely. Never let the mistakes of others make you doubt your goodness. To Serena, you taught me one of life's hardest lessons, that even the deepest wounds can heal when pride gives way to truth. You've grown, my dear, and I see it every time I watch you with the children. Keep that humility close. It's worth more than any fortune. To Emily and Jacob, you are the future. Be kind, even when the world isn't. Remember that family isn't about who's right, it's about who chooses to stay when things go wrong. And to you all, I leave you not just my house, or my savings, or the pieces of land your father and I worked for. I leave you something far more valuable, the proof that forgiveness is stronger than resentment, and that truth, when spoken with grace, can rebuild even what was thought to be lost forever. If you remember nothing else, remember this: love is not a weakness, it's the only thing that survives everything. Judith. When I finished reading, the room was silent. No one moved for a few seconds, and then Matthew reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "That's beautiful." Serena's eyes glistened. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for giving me a second chance I didn't deserve." "You earned it," I replied gently. "We all did." Emily climbed into my lap then, wrapping her little arms around my neck. "Grandma, what's a legacy?" she asked innocently. I smiled, brushing her hair back. "A legacy, sweetheart, is what you leave behind when you're gone. Not things, but love, lessons, and memories. That's what lasts." She thought for a moment, then whispered, "Then your legacy is us." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged her tighter. "Yes," I said softly, "it is." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the quiet of my living room. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of gold and lavender. I could hear the faint echo of laughter still lingering in the air, and I smiled to myself. The bitterness of the past was gone, replaced by something purer: peace. The same kind Peter used to talk about when we'd sit on this very porch, dreaming of the future. I walked to the garden one last time that night. The roses were in full bloom again, their petals glistening with dew. I whispered into the breeze, "It's done, Peter. They're whole again. We're whole again." As I turned to go back inside, I glanced at the stars just beginning to appear above the horizon. They twinkled faintly, steady and sure, like promises kept. My revenge had once been to expose the truth, but my final gift, the one that mattered most, was to teach them all that love, when it endures through pain, is the truest justice there is. And with that, I knew my story was complete.